Hello, welcome back to CSC 280, the Introduction to Cybersecurity at Adelphi University. In this video we continue our discussion about human factors in cybersecurity. In the previous video I introduced administrative controls and governance. Particularly what we said is, administrative controls take the form of policies, procedures, guidelines and standards. These policies we can often break down in issue-specific and product-specific policies. And we discussed some standards or some requirements to which all of these policies should adhere. So for example, we should have a clear owner of the policy. We should have clear policy statements. We should know who's enforcing these policies and how to grant exceptions. All of those are true. However, the topic of this video is how do we then actually make sure that this works? Or at least the extent possible. So first of all, I can only follow policies, procedures and guidelines and standards if I know they exist. That sounds really obvious, but it really is not. There are too many organizations who will write books upon books worth of policies. Maybe you get a copy of that book when you start being an employee there and they ask you to sign for acknowledgement. But that does not mean that you know what's in them. It at best means that you are legally now bound to them. But it doesn't help. So we need to make sure that for every time that we write a new policy or that we or a procedure or a standard or a guideline or that we make changes to them, that we communicate that with the people who are subject to these administrative controls. And that's hard. It's an ongoing activity. It's something that is also not the sexiest of things. People aren't looking forward to this and say, oh look, we got an update on policy. Let's sit down and read this at our leisure. No, it doesn't work that way. People don't like to read about these things. And so we still need to communicate this to our constituents. So the first thing we want to do is awareness. Raise awareness of the fact that policies exist and that policies in particular domains are in place in my organization. We don't have to go into full details as to what's in those policies. Maybe there's a message or two that we want to get across. But when it comes to security or cybersecurity, maybe the whole point of the awareness campaigns could be that security is important and we need everyone to play a role in it, in maintaining the level of security that we want to, because it's not something we can pass off to the IT department who buys a firewall and says, cool, now we're secure. Now, security is an ongoing effort. It depends as much on people and processes as it does on technology, and therefore everyone really should be aware all the time that the choices they make has a direct impact on policy, on security. And so we should need to have a really simple message. And the message should really be a reminder of the fact that people need to think. So for example, we do a lot of phishing awareness work. And that means that we regularly tell our people, like, hey, just because it comes in email doesn't mean you can trust it. Or maybe think before you click, or think before you hit reply. And we follow up on that with, for example, self-phishing campaigns. But that's already a next stage. The first message is, ooh, security is important. And the second one might be, ooh, you can't always trust people. They might ask you to do things that aren't right. And that is an ongoing thing. And whether it is, custom screensavers or poster campaigns, emails, in-person training, signage, it doesn't matter. All of those are tools and techniques we can draw upon to remind people of the importance of, in our case, cybersecurity. But it's not telling them how to be secure, because the specific guidance on how to do something, that's training. Training is usually very different from awareness. Sometimes we call it awareness training, but that's really not the right thing to do. We raise awareness to explain what needs to happen, and then we trained people to give them the tools as to how to do that. Where awareness is generally something that we can do almost not very personalized. Like I said, we can do it through posters, or we can do it through screensavers, or any of those things. But training works best if we do it in person, and whether it's in person in a room together or in person in an online classroom, that doesn't really matter. But we want to make sure that we, instead of targeting an entire population, we bring people together in smaller groups in order to teach them how to do things. So that training, by definition, is already much harder than awareness raising, because the groups are smaller, and that means it's more effort to reach the same amount of people. It's also something that you can only do for so long. You can ask people to come to a training for a half hour or to an hour, but at the same time, as a business, what you have to realize is that if I pull 10 people away from their work for an hour in order to give them a training, it means that I just lost 10 hours of productivity, while the costs stay there. So just from that, the lost productivity as a result of training is something that needs to be factored into the training decision, that says who needs to be trained, how often do they need trained, and what are the consequences if they decide not to follow training or come to training. And so that is a good question there. So eventually people are aware of the fact that security is an important thing, and that they need to be careful with their email. We've trained them as to how to recognize phishing emails and how to report them to the cybersecurity team, and how to mark them as junk and not respond to them. And that's good. For the vast majority of the people, we're done. However, there is a subset of employees or people in general that need to learn more. They need to learn why this is a bad thing. And those are people, for example, who need to develop new policy or set new standards. And that's called education. That's what we're doing here today. We're not just training you. We're not just giving you a specific skill. What we're trying to do is make you understand why we do things the way we do, so that if circumstances change, you can adjust your thinking and maybe come up with new suggestions on how to do it. And so not all of your users have to go to that level of education. If you are doing risk management, if you're setting policies, if you're designing new systems, for example, at that point training is not sufficient. You need to be educated. Education, as you know, is expensive, for a number of reasons. One, it's a lot more specialized, which means that you have a lot less people who are educated than they are trained, and that means that the cost doesn't necessarily change, but the total costs have to spread over less people. Plus, the people who perform the training are also a scarce resource and are typically more expensive than people who provide training. All of those reasons factor into why education is more expensive than training. I can train a person in an hour, but I can't educate someone in an hour. Education is also a longer term process. But looking at this, we now have 3 layers of a mechanism by which we tell people about policies and procedures. We hopefully convince them, we tell them how to follow those policies and procedures, and hopefully the training also convinces people why following the training and the procedure is the right thing to do. And then on top of that, for those people who are higher level thinkers, education is an important topic as well.